special chocolate and cheese plate with some other goodies in the plate for a price of $36. It's a special discount price for our Lions Club of $36. We encourage you to consider that, and you have to go online and look at our notice in the email, but you have to do it yourself. And then there's also a time that will be given to you for picking it up, and then having it all available by noon on the 17th. So Antonelli's is providing that. We encourage you. If you're not wanting to go that route, you can provide your own goodies at home and your own beverage, and that will work out just as well. Then after the first hour, we will have some holiday celebrations in terms of sharing different stories. And there, Mark is putting up the information that was in your email. So thank you very much, Mark.
Yes, and you can find that right now on the website.
Different pieces of breaking election news and another setback in the president's campaign to challenge the election results. The Wisconsin State Supreme Court, as a small conservative majority, has just reached.
Let me move on and mention that.
Sounds like a paid political announcement going on.
Oh, is that what it is? Let me mention that December is going to be a little bit abbreviated in terms of our Lions Club meetings. We will be meeting next week, December the 10th, and the following week, December the 17th. And then the rest of the month, we will observe the holiday season and not meet. December 17th will be our last meeting in December. And then we will resume our meetings the first Thursday in January 2021, and that'll be January the 7th. And my next announcement has to do with membership, because you may know that from last July to this month, December, the Lions Club International has waived the dues for joining. And so this month is the last month where that will be recognized. And so for those that are thinking of a friend or a family member to invite them to join our club, this will be the last month where that particular fee is being waived. So it's only like $36, but that might buy a couple of hamburgers. So just kind of keep that in mind. We encourage you to invite friends and then let them decide if they how they want to participate after that. All right, a couple of items concerning our members. Judy Jones, I want you to keep her in your thoughts. She's had a death in her family. Her stepson passed away, unfortunately, and we want to keep her in our thoughts. And I believe also another member, Mem's husband is in not doing well in health-wise. I believe he's in the hospital, but I don't have an update on that. So let's keep our members in mind as we go into this special season. Okay, I believe that those are my announcements for today. And I do want to point something out. See if I can show this wherever my camera is. I'm not able to show it, but it's disappearing, I see. Anyway, it has to do with the little newsletter that went out. It was a one sheet through the email having to do with Happy Thanksgiving, and this went out at the last meeting. And I just want to call a couple of things to your attention there. Some of you may have let it get by with this being such a happy season or such a busy season. But there was a little notice in there about nutrition. Anyone interested in helping us give a little update on nutrition? We're definitely in the season where nutrition and diet are going to be a temptation. At least the offerings, food offerings, are going to be a temptation. So I was thinking that maybe we might remind ourselves, and someone that might have a background in nutrition or might have some good folk remedies, home remedies on how to deal with our temptations and our food habits, so that we can eat on a more nutritious diet. So if you're interested, let me know, and we might try to get something started in January or February. Okay. Birthdays. Okay, birthdays. Let's see. December the 1st, Robert Watson. Okay, Robert, happy birthday to you. And that's our only birthday on the list, unless we neglected to include everyone. But I believe that's our birthday. So we send our birthday greetings to Robert. Okay. With that, let me see if there are any hands up. Anybody else want to add? Tommy, I see your hand up.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is in regards to next week's program, the 10th of December, in conjunction with the membership drive that Rudy had mentioned. There'll be an incentive for you to put a guest on tomorrow or next Thursday on the 10th. There's a $50 prize for whoever has the most guests at the meeting next Thursday. Next Thursday's meeting is going to be a rather unconventional presentation. It's a road trip interview with the principals of the 6 schools that we are donating the $500 to, a little bit about the people that the school is named after and their location, but then culminating with Ann making a presentation of the new superintendent of schools. So we definitely want to meet her and figure out what she's got going on. But Ann Tice, the board member, and our club member will be making that introduction. It'll be a very tight meeting, so everybody needs to kind of limit their conversations. Myself being one of the people that have a tendency to run off a little more than usual, but we are going to start at 12:30 and the superintendent will need to leave at 1:30. So let's give her plenty of time to tell us what's going on. Thank you, Rudy.
All right. Okay. Someone else had their hand up. Bill?
Yeah, Rudy, for those of you who didn't get the announcement, APD this year for Blue Santa is going to be giving out gift cards to families in lieu of toys. That was just a recent announcement I caught on the news. And secondly, I'd like to see us go over $1,500 for that event. So for the benefit of those who haven't sent their checks in, if it isn't too late, including myself, if you could give us the address again to mail those checks to, if we aren't doing it by PayPal or some other means.
Yeah, let me refer to Mark. We were doing it through our website, Bill.
Right.
And I think that was also an address, but Mark, can you address that, please?
Yeah, the mailing of the checks for Blue Santa, Jim or Ann, you may want to correct me on this, is just send them to the club address, or would you rather we sent them straight to Blue Santa?
Right. And Mark, they need to make the check payable to Austin Founder Lions Club Activity Fund.
Okay. Very good. Thanks.
Yeah, and with that, and indicating that on your check, you definitely want to send it to Jim Robertson. I don't think the APD would be able to
Right.
do that. But anyway, Jim, I see your hand up. Is that confirming?
I was just confirming, yes.
All right.
Send them to
Okay.
us. Like Ann said, make sure you make them out to the Austin Downtown Founder Lions Club, not to Blue Santa.
Right.
We'll
All right.
write a check to Blue Santa.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that thought, Bill. And it's
Sure.
very, very generous again that we might be able to make that $1,500 total. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks.
And I believe I had one more hand up. Robert?
I saw on CNN, I remember Ken Crone had a birthday on November 30th.
Oh, on CNN. Wow. That's going pretty highbrow, but that's Ken for you. Well, happy birthday to Ken on November the 30th there. Okay, well, it's time for us to move on.
I think Alan Ford has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Alan?
Just a quick mention here. Everybody's looking for cash right now, but if you have an old coat or two around, Coats for Kids, I think, is still well short of their goal this year. And we've had a symbiotic relationship with them for several years in cooperating with the Junior League to do our vision screenings at their giveaways. And since we can't do that, keep in mind, if you've got a coat or two to spare, or if you end up with an extra 20 bucks and say they can buy a new coat for every $20 they get. So remember, Coats for Kids.
All right, thank you. Well, it is time for us to move to our program, and to introduce our program today, Patty Robinson. Patty, would you take it from here, please?
Sure. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Pope. Dr. Pope has her PhD in art history from UT, so hook 'em horns. She specialized in modern art of Europe and America. Karen taught art history for about 30 years at the Baylor University and retired in May of 2015. Since 1995, this is where I met Karen. She's been doing a lecture programs, art museum day trips, art history study tours in US and Europe through the Art Insight Adventures in Art History group. Karen lives here in Austin, where she is heavily involved in the operation of the Neil Cochran House. And she's married to Alex Pope, who is a current member of this club. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much. Somebody's going to make it possible for me to share my screen, yes?
You're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate seeing some familiar faces, including Jim Robertson, who takes care of the tax return for Art Insight. And appreciate Patty's enthusiasm for a program she heard me give at the Neil Cochran House Museum some months ago about the very first World's Fair. Some of you have probably learned something about the fair that took place in Chicago in 1893 called the Columbian Exposition as a commemoration of Columbus's arrival in America 401 years before then. And maybe you read Eric Larson's book called The Devil in the White City. It's probably the most famous of the historic world fairs now, but I have interest in this one too. And if you happen to have watched the series about Queen Victoria, you may have watched the episode in which Albert announced his intention to put on a fair like this, whose purpose was to share industrial invention with the widest possible audience. That's really the context that we're dealing with, but it has great architectural interest, which Betty Trent will attest to, and some interesting extensions into our own time, which I'll include at the end. I know my time's going to go fast, so here we go. This is one of the many official images of the beautiful, unconventional building that was constructed to accommodate an entire World's Fair under one roof. That in itself was a technological milestone, and we'll have a little bit of information about that as we go along. If you know London and can't go there now, you can at least visit in maps. And here's a Google map and the original plan of the footprint of the building that was to house the Great Exhibition at the southern edge of the Great Hyde Park. The Serpentine is the famous body of water that most people think of when they think about Hyde Park. But this park also is bordered by an important street along which one finds a number of the important cultural monuments of England, including Harrods, which had been built only 2 years before the fair and apparently benefited tremendously from all the additional fair traffic, and really gave Harrods its international reputation. You also notice the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was an outcome of this exhibition. When the exhibition folded, the question was where to put all these wonderful works of art and decorative arts. And the answer came to build a specific museum for it, now known for the sponsors of the exhibition. So that's the orientation. But the real story revolves around three people. The first person of importance, excuse me, is the Prince himself, Prince Albert, the consort to Victoria, who was very interested in industrial progress in Britain and was thereby the president of the Society of Arts, which encouraged technological innovation. And the exhibition was his idea. He got Queen Victoria to agree, and she declared him the president of the exhibition. Here is a picture of Albert and Victoria in the exhibition proper. You'll see some more interesting images shortly. But if you watch the Queen Victoria series on PBS, you'll recognize the handsome, dashing fellow who played Albert and was riveted by the invention of the steam locomotive. This is a scene from that series. Important figure number two was Henry Cole, a real entrepreneur. He was so-called an industrial designer, and in fact was responsible for inventing the world's first commercially produced Christmas card. So that makes this a timely presentation for this month. He also participated in the creation of postage to make it easier for written communication to go around the country. He was a member of an organization called the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce. And that role made him very attractive to Albert, who backed him and appointed him as the commissioner for the exhibition. Henry Cole was quite a salesman, as you can see from the success of his fundraising, which led to a huge surplus of funds, which Cole designated to be used for the outcome of the exhibition, including the Victoria and Albert Museum I just mentioned. And here's a picture of the Royal Albert Hall, which also benefited from that surplus from the exhibition. And up here at the left, you see an image that is supposedly Henry Cole's family crest. It involves the head of a bull and HC, his initials. I don't know if that means he's a bull in a china closet or just very bullish on progress, but this is a panel that's repeated in little niches at about this level down here around the base of the Royal Albert Hall in memory of Henry Cole's important role in its creation. The third figure is the real dark horse in the story. His name was Joseph Paxton, and although he was very involved in railway technology, he was a director of the Midland Railway, his real talent, or at least his notoriety in history, comes from the fact that he designed the biggest greenhouse anybody had ever seen on the grounds of Chatsworth. This by itself wouldn't be significant, except as the plans for the Great Exhibition were underway, 250 designs were submitted as plans for the building, and none of them were regarded as suitable. And on a, cocktail napkin in a bar somewhere, somebody engaged Joseph Paxton to make some little hypothetical sketches about how he would proceed to build the necessary enclosure. And he basically amplified the iron and glass configuration of large greenhouses and expanded it to such a point that in a 3-story configuration, he could propose enclosure of the this great exhibition very efficiently. So he got the job. Here's a picture of Joseph Paxton. It certainly made his wider international reputation. And the project proceeded as, in effect, a giant greenhouse that would house the fair. So large that it could enclose the trees that were on the site. Other trees were brought into the exhibition. It was filled with light, of course. This canopy marks the spot where the royal family stood for the dedication, the grand opening of the fair. This is a very famous picture. I think I once even had a jigsaw puzzle of this image. And here's a better view of how extensive the fair is. You can see this beautiful fountain, which we'll talk about much later. This is a glass fountain. There were 3 of them in the building altogether. And notice also these signs hanging that tell you that countries are represented by partitioned sections of the space, and then industries and trades are identified by similar signage, and many of them are upstairs. The organization is somewhat difficult to understand, and you could spend a long time looking at these plans, which we will not. But I've circled on the ground floor plan and on the upper floor plan the parts that I'm going to show you pictures of specifically, so you'll have an idea of how cheek by jowl these displays seem to have been. Of course, we want to see the United States contributions to this exhibition, and they exist on both floors. Here downstairs, you can read the United States at the very end in a corner. Could have been a primo spot, I don't know, or an afterthought. And here is more material sent by the United States upstairs, also just basically above, close to above the spot on the ground floor. Those red dots are the 3 fountains I would pointed out. And if you get close enough to your screen to read any of this language, you can see that the metal manufacturers are down here, the big heavy stuff, especially the equipment, but woolen and textiles are on this floor too. There are numerous very small installations. This is Ceylon and Jersey. They have their own little spaces on the map that are juxtaposed with really big ones. Big machinery is identified in this box right here. As you can read from the label, this building was 3 times the size of St. Paul's Cathedral. So here are some examples. Of course, the fair was very well, it was enthusiastically attended and very well documented, including numerous volumes with these colored lithographs that record the machinery and the people who operated them and the specter of visitors as they strolled through these giant displays. Here's the mining display that shows you giant minerals that have been excavated from the ground. I laugh to see the juxtaposition of these beautifully dressed people with these big objects just dug out of the ground. Here is the woolen and worsted display, which tells us that there was a lot for the average consumer to enjoy and to contemplate, the chance to think about, new wardrobe or new projects. This is a fascinating display to me. I watch all these PBS masterpiece shows that look back into time and try to recreate events from a century or 2 ago. And there always is correspondence being handled by the characters. And that correspondence is always big stiff pieces of paper folded multiple times, sometimes with a seal on the back. And that's because there was no such thing as an envelope until about the time of the Great Exhibition. So here is the display that lets us know about some of the pioneering inventions that were displayed for the public to admire and to contemplate. Goods for the home. I don't know who would need this chair in the living room, but the latest fashions and comforts, sources of entertainment, all of this stuff making a big case for the modern merchant, especially the department store that was emerging at this time. The national displays featured the things for which those countries continue to be famous, especially the textiles from Turkey. Here are objects on display for North Germany. And a full-sized model of an Indian elephant sits in the middle of a display that shows canopies that you can acquire so that you can be shaded in your ride on your elephant. There were also various acknowledgements of the Queen and the Prince who were responsible for the fair, and one of them was the gift from India of the Kohinoor diamond, which was displayed in an elaborate bird cage on a little velvet pillow, and eventually was recut to work it into the regalia, excuse me, that you see on Victoria in this portrait. So how did America figure at the Great Exhibition? This is one of the most famous sculptures of the 19th century. It's come under a new scrutiny recently because it's about slavery and the auction of human beings for this purpose of slavery. If you look, you see chains between her wrists and those manacles on her wrists. She is otherwise the pure, beautiful, white, idealized female nude of Greek antiquity, which had come into a kind of, had been revived as an ideal for sculptors in the 19th century, especially when they traveled to Italy and or developed studios in France, in Paris in particular. So this is a key work of sculpture in its period and made Hiram Powers famous, who is known also for a grand seated portrait. No, I'll skip that. But this sculpture has been copied widely. There are replicas of just the head and shoulders. The fact that the figure was nude caused it to be controversial, and there were limited times for viewing of the sculpture. You couldn't bring your children to see it. So that there's got an elaborate story all of its own, but it was just one of a series of a group of very interesting and unique offerings to give snapshots of American culture to a population which was mostly unfamiliar with America, except vicariously through literature and news accounts. Interesting things about the American participation in the Great Exhibition. They reserved more space than they needed, and that was really, they were really made aware of that by the fact that, or they let everybody else know about it by the fact that the items arrived late. But the Americans attained a reputation through this exhibition for practical and productive manufacturing, especially including the Colt revolver, which you see in this picture. There were other displays that introduced the world to the Bowie knife, to the bald eagle, our national bird. Maybe Betty knows who Ryder is, who invented a version of a truss suspension bridge. Rubber tires from Goodyear were on display. The daguerreotype, the sort of ancestor to the photograph, was on display, and these would have been made very early by a fellow who became famous in documenting the Civil War in the next decade. McCormick's Reaper was on display, and Whitney's cotton gin, and Singer's improved sewing machine. So American technological prowess was on display at the Great Exhibition, much to our country's benefit, I think. As I mentioned, there was a lot of documentation. Here's another picture of the the downstairs US pavilion, and you can see our flags and the big eagle, spread eagle up here at the top. Here is Hiram Powers' slave figure in its little tent. The documentation was really elaborate, beautiful, thorough, colored. And here you see the footnote, Dickinson's comprehensive pictures of the Great Exhibition, made for Prince Albert and published in 1854. So it took a little while to get it done. Some of the most important artists of the day participated in making these images. So there's a really good record of the fair. And the fair was so successful. I'm sorry that I left out the slide that talked about the whole world participating in the opening. The ceremonies were really extravagant with grand choirs and lots of music and a lot of money spent. But the fair overall was so successful that when it closed in October of 1851, the decision was made just to preserve it by relocating it, which must have been an interesting project given its materials. But I think it was disassembled and shipped to a beautiful suburban location in another park southeast of London. I just read in the news that some protesters are about to violate a statue of Margaret Thatcher that's being installed. Margaret Thatcher retired to this little village of Dulwich, which is famous for an art gallery. So this is a really lovely, special part of the greater environs of London. And in this park, which became known as the Crystal Palace Park, the Crystal Palace, the great glass and steel structure from Hyde Park, was reassembled. In this photograph, or not this print of the building, you can see the recognizable configuration of the long rectangular piece that would have been a nave if it were a church, and of the big cross piece, the transept, that's taller and characterized by this barrel vault structure. But you can distinguish it from the Hyde Park version if you make a comparison between these two pictures, because when the thing was rebuilt in Sydenham, the whole thing was enlarged a little bit. It's taller. That was the goal, was to make it taller. So it's really 4 or 5 layers tall rather than the 3 of the Hyde Park version. And at the ends, 2 giant water towers were placed, which I guess operate by gravity to provide water, probably to operate this fountain, as well as provide some help for fire suppression if that became necessary. You can see from the pedestrian traffic around the Sydenham location of the Crystal Palace that the place continued to be popular, but it became something like a special event center because the collections, the things that had been displayed in it in 1850 in the Hyde Park version, were all dispersed. They were sent home or collected and installed in museum settings. And so this building became a kind of a giant space with an unspecified use, and that was its downfall. This is a photograph of it under construction when it's being put back together, which I think is one of the splendid photographs of the whole project. And this is the outcome. It eventually was consumed by fire, which melted some of the metal and shattered the glass. And but it lived until 1936 when this fire happened. You can see that there was a valiant effort to put out the fire and save the building, but it was not successful. All that was left was those 2 towers. And as you can see, they were dismantled because they were regarded as conspicuous to enemy planes during the bombardment of England in the Second World War. So this is a timeline that mentions some of the high points once the fair closed in Hyde Park and the building itself moved to Sydenham. It was bought by a company formed for that purpose, who invested vastly more than they paid for it and committed themselves to a huge upkeep. The multipurpose space was christened by Queen Victoria, and things like the Handel Festival were held there, but the company survived only barely into the 20th century. And then other things happened to make use of the property now and then. I was interested to learn that it was the first location of the Imperial War Museum, which is now a great institution in London. So here is an image of the great configuration of the fair, which was reproduced multiple times thanks to its success. I've called this slide the legacy of the exhibition, because in Manchester 6 years later, another fair was opened, which was devoted entirely to the visual arts and displayed, as you see, over 1,000 old master paintings. That exhibition was so successful that in 2008, the Manchester Art Gallery organized an exhibition as a kind of celebration of the 150th anniversary of that first one. And here you get an idea of how much it mimicked the Crystal Palace, except in materials. I mean, this is not glass and steel, this is masonry again, and probably some concrete. But in the configuration seems to have been so successful in the way it united such a vast amount of space that it was copied again. Some further outcomes of the Great Exhibition included the fact that the decorative arts, so highly celebrated in the display, led to the formation of new businesses, new enterprises, including the very celebrated arts and crafts master William Morris, who organized his decorative arts firm as an outcome of the wallpapers and furniture that had been displayed in the Great Exhibition. I remember visiting the Victoria and Albert Museum for the first time and not being really clear about the relationship between the V&A and the Great Exhibition. But in the V&A, you can still sit and have tea or a cafeteria luncheon in 2 rooms that are papered in William Morris wallpaper and decorated with things that came from that represent the aesthetic he introduced at the fair, upon which he built this firm. So that to me is one of the powerful outcomes of the Great Exhibition. What you're looking at here is the Brompton Boilers, an exhibition palace that was established to be a permanent fixture in London. And part of the big features that make it unusual were built by Brunel, who's very famous as a bridge engineer in the middle of the 19th century. I mentioned that Harrods got a big boost from the fair as a consequence of the success of the fair itself. And most important is the fact that the fair set an example which inspired many countries to plan to do something similar in their own countries, to show off their own industrial prowess, to invite the world to participate and to visit and to be impressed. And that is certainly what happens with world fairs today. It was not called a World Fair in 1851, but it engendered the concept of the World Fair because it had an international scope and reach. And there's now a World Fair Commission, and they help decide who's going to make the next fair happen when and where. And their policies and rules have been established. But this was really the first of what have come to be known as the World Fairs. The next one happened in Paris in 1855 as a kind of response to the Great Exhibition. Albert's mission was to display engineering and industry, and the French were not really competitive in those areas. So in 1855, the big emphasis in the World's Fair in Paris, the answer to the English fair, was much more cultural arts and visual arts related. And that has big consequences in the history of art because of the artists who displayed their work in that show and became international stars as a result. In fact, French painters came to England and saw the Crystal Palace once it was moved to Sydenham for interesting reasons. Camille Pissarro wasn't necessarily curious about the Crystal Palace, but he was taking his family out of France to avoid the complications of the Franco-Prussian War. And he gravitated toward the little village of Sydenham as a place to house his family while they were out of France. And the things to paint in Sydenham at that time included the Crystal Palace. You can see in this painting the emphasis on the Key building, and then in this little painting you can see just barely the tallest part of the exhibition space, but here's one of those water towers, and the other one is at the very right edge of the painting. So one last question. Were there any Texans at the Great Exhibition? I haven't come across any memoirs by anybody who visited, although it's not impossible to think that there were Texans as visitors to the fair. But there are some other connections to Texas made with the Great Exhibition, and those are the last things I want to show you. First, look at this fountain. Remember that this fountain is crystal, and know that there is an exact replica of that fountain in this building in Dallas, because Trammell Crow got interested in the Great Exhibition, and when he proposed a giant market hall for technology called the InfoMart in Dallas in the 1980s, he decided to model it after the Crystal Palace. Now, this is the Crystal Palace much magnified, because it's not a long skinny building with a transept. It's really a big square building with multiple references to the barrel vaults to give some ornamentation to the roof line. But it makes quite a statement right along Stemmons Parkway when you are driving in Dallas. If you come up from Austin and turn left and miss your turn onto the Woodall Rogers Freeway and you end up coming further west, you go right past it. It's very easy to get into the parking lot. And if you enter the building, you have a chance to see one of these crystal replicas of the fountain from the Crystal Palace standing in the atrium, and similarly breathtaking height of structure with this glass at the top. I was fascinated to learn that the British Parliament declared the InfoMart to be the official successor to the Crystal Palace, which is a nice way of suggesting that the image and the reputation and the milestone of the Crystal Palace lives on somehow, although the original building is gone. It changed hands in 2019, and its new owner is planning to invest in a huge amount of money to expand it still further. So we may see the Crystal Palace in Dallas in the news from time to time if we're paying attention. There's quite a bit of literature associated with the Crystal Palace and the Great Exhibition of 1851. The official catalog has been replicated. I think it stayed in print partly because of the association of Charles Dickens with the writing of the thing. But here's a whole volume of the photography that was produced during the lifetime of the Great Exhibition, and a nice account of how the Great Exhibition affected the future of England, thanks to Prince Albert's vision. And there are books about those three key figures, particularly, I mean, we can find things about Prince Albert, so I wanted to emphasize Paxton, the designer of the greenhouses, who came to Albert's rescue by solving the problem of how to house the exhibition efficiently, and Henry Cole, the promoter who got the money together and encouraged entrepreneurial displays throughout the exhibition. I'll go back to the series on PBS on Masterpiece one more time. Here are the two main characters playing Victoria and Albert, and this is the moment surrounded by the greenery that was housed within the exhibition, the moment when they officially declare the exhibition open. I think World's Fairs are challenging for the countries who want to put them on because they're tremendously expensive. And as you can imagine, the pandemic and its what follows will chill the enthusiasm for projects of this scale. But I wanted to put a few of these recent fairs on the from the calendar on the screen and mention, I don't know what happened in Dubai this year, but Osaka is supposedly planning one for 2025. And they always are accompanied by interesting logos and sometimes themes. I missed the one in Milan about feeding the planet, although I'm interested in what goes on in Milan. So that is the end. I don't know where these red scratches came from, but this is the end of my PowerPoint. I went quickly, but if anybody's got a question, I'd love to try to answer it. And I want to wish you a happy holidays. It sounds like you have some exciting plans for your organization, and I wish you all the best. I will send a contribution to the Blue Santa and Coats for Kids programs. Okay, I'm going to stop the sharing so I can see the screen.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much for a very
You're
interesting,
welcome.
just fascinating presentation. And now for questions, I see Gaylord's hand up. And Gaylord, what is your question?
Unmute, Gaylord.
I did. Karen, that is a fascinating presentation. As a Baylor grad, I greatly preceded your time there, but it would have been fascinating to take one of your courses compared to all the boring courses I had to take. But you mentioned the financing, but how was the Great Exhibition as well as the Crystal Palace paid for? That had to be in its time quite an undertaking. And I wondered if various countries participated in the financing, or was it mostly England, or how was it paid for?
I think it was mostly England and English organizations who would have had a vested interest in the success of the project. But I can't tell the answer for sure, but I think that countries all had to fork over something to secure their presence in the building.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your
Any
question.
other questions? Yeah, any other questions? Just raise your hand. I may not be able to see everybody.
I see
Greg,
JP hand up.
Yeah,
JP?
Yes, ma'am. I echo what Gaylord said. Quite a fascinating discourse you brought to us. And I would add to what you said about the Crystal Palace building in Dallas area. The company I worked for had an office there, so I spent probably 3 or 4 times a year. I had to go up and visit the office and conduct business. And I was always very fascinated when I walked into the building, just how immaculate it looked. And if it is a mirror or a partial mirror of the original Crystal Palace, that place must have been fascinating also and very elaborate. It was quite, I guess, a little confusing the first time I walked into that building where our office was, because I didn't really believe I was in an office building. It didn't seem like what I was used to, a traditional office building. But it's a very, very magnificent experience. And anyone has some opportunity, I think would be worthwhile just to drop in and walk in the lobby. It's an open building. It doesn't, you don't have to make an appointment or anything.
One of the cool things about it is that it's very utilitarian feeling, I think. The wall comes right to the floor. There's no molding, no messing around, no furniture really. But all the walls, when I visited, the walls on the ground floor were held murals that replicated some of the big pictures that were made of the fair when it was happening. The image I showed you of the interior with the royal family opening the fair, and I mentioned it was a jigsaw puzzle, that image was the big mural that was inside the building. So if you walk into the InfoMart without awareness of its relationship to this historic event in England, you get some acquaintance with it if you pay any attention to what's on the walls there, because you see those historic events as they were captured at the time.
Greg, I
I
believe
would
you
love
had
to
a
know
question.
Christopher Crow's story. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
Sorry.
was going to, Greg, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. This is a very interesting presentation. I want to thank you for bringing it to us. In 1969, I camped on the site at the Crystal Palace in Sydenham, and I'm wondering what's happened to the land there. What's the future for it?
It's been turned into a recreational park. And it seems to me there is multifamily housing nearby. It's certainly more densely occupied than it was in the late 19th century. If you just go to Google Maps and choose Google Earth, you get a pretty good idea of what's happening right around there. Just Google Sydenham and you'll find it.
Thank you.
Mark, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, one thing that jumped out at me is, and of course very obvious, is all that glass, the plate glass. And I, while we were talking, I did a quick search, and plate glass wasn't patented or until the 1840s. And I think it's just fascinating. And I could imagine someone coming across that and just seeing all that plate glass that had never existed before.
Right.
And how stunning it must have been to them. It's to the people of the time of how that could ever have happened when plate glass was just not possible before.
And I think that explains why it got the fairly grand name of Crystal Palace. There was nothing really crystal about the structure, although there was a crystal fountain. But the sheer magnificence of all of that glass would have engendered a special name, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the date on the slide was 1832 for sheet glass. Can you imagine it being transported to the site? Mm-hmm. Hyde Park would have been handy, but Sydenham not. In fact, there was a branch of the train line that went to Sydenham that was vacated sometime after the Crystal Palace was moved there, and that contributed to its decline because it was not easy to get to by public transportation anymore. Tommy, did you have a question?
Yeah, Karen, could I ask this? I'm sorry to interrupt again, but we'll take one more question. But if there are other questions, could you stay with us for a few minutes after we adjourn the meeting?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Tommy, I'm going to let you ask the last question before we adjourn.
All right. First of all, I want to say years and years and years ago, I came across a car dealership that was very, very, very popular in Austin. Are you related to the Pope of the car dealership still? Without a husband, I believe.
Glad to know that. No, these popes came from Arkansas. My father-in-law practiced law in Fort Worth. His father practiced law in Marshall, Texas. They were all lawyers.
Well, I was going to make the point. Betty had alluded to the fact that y'all had a history here, and I was just wondering if it had been part of it. My comment had been in regards to the glass issue. And again, Mac and Betty and all other architects that are members of our club will tell you the issue of getting code compliance with safety glass versus crystal versus everything else probably came into play. And I don't know the answer to the question. In the rebuilding of the palace, what the requirements or restrictions might have been, that would be a very interesting question because it affects not only the safety features, but also the cost element of putting in literally that much glass in any type of building and the heat loads that are built up by it and, you know, all the other things that go along to it. At some point, if you had an inquiry to that, I'd always be interested in knowing what the answer is.
Well, if I didn't want to show you the back of my head, I mean, I would turn around because in a case right behind me is the volume on the Great Exhibition. It's a hefty tome and it probably has that kind of detail in it. I'll see if that's true. And if so, I'll pass that word to somebody.
Give it to me. I'd love to research that.
Okay. All right.
Well, thank you so much again. And for those that might still want to ask Karen a question, please stand by. Let me take a moment to adjourn our meeting. but before doing that, Tommy, you had already told us a little bit about next week's program. Anything else you want to add to that, please?
Only if you bring a guest, be very short in the introduction, and there is a $50 gift certificate for the person bringing the most in. You will enjoy meeting the new superintendent. She will meet the level of standard of quality of superintendents in the past. She's a winner. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, I believe we have completed our agenda. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Betty, for joining us. And again, our special thanks to our speaker and Karen. Again, if you will just stay with us a few moments, we may have other questions. So with this, I am adjourning today's meeting. So y'all take care. Okay, with a meeting adjourned and you need to take care of other things, we understand that, but any other questions? Who is that, Lauda? Oh, I'm sorry. Any other questions?
Is that Carolyn Wright in San Antonio? I'm looking at Carolyn Wright's name on the screen. She's muted.
Yes, it's me.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Nice to see you. I loved your presentation.
Well,
so I'll ask a question. Go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
What prompted moving such a complicated structure? Why didn't they just leave it in Hyde Park?
There was objection to it continuing to obstruct the uses of the park. I can't remember the details, but people were, there's always opposition coming from somewhere. It's kind of like what happened to the Eiffel Tower. Some people thought the Eiffel Tower was wonderful, and some people wanted it to be demolished the minute the fair was over. It was an eyesore. So it didn't strike everybody as aesthetic, and it did strike some people, I think, as a kind of interruption of the tranquility of the park and its traditional use. Yeah, I just think the idea of dismantling and relocating it was a tremendously ambitious idea.
Yes.
But it succeeded. The only thing I know like that is a movie whose title I cannot remember, about a missionary who wanted to build a church in South America and built it out of metal and glass and floated it down the Amazon.
I know that movie. I can't get its name. I know that movie.
It again now that I know a little more about the technology.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
another question. So good to see you, Carolyn.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Alan, I think your hand is up.
Well, I just wanted to mention, if you want to put yourself back in Victorian England in the context there, our book club a few months ago, actually, read The Darwin Affair by Tim Mason, which was a bestseller last year. It's sort of contrived, but I guess all historical fiction tends to be that way. But the hero is based on a Dickensian character, and a lot of the history is extremely accurate, and it involves Prince Albert and his support of science in particular, in his advocacy of Charles Darwin for a knighthood. But for a picture of London and learning a lot about Albert in particular, and while enjoying a fiction, like I said, it's kind of contrived, but it was one of those things I couldn't put down until I was finished with it. But The Darwin Affair was kind of an interesting look at things.
Well, I appreciate the recommendation. I just joined a book club and now I've got something to suggest. Thank you.
Well, I'd be interested in knowing what your book club thinks of it.
Okay. Well, this club is very adventurous in their taste, from what I can tell. So we'll see if they're interested. For all I know, they've read it already. We'll see.
Okay. I'll bet somebody has.
And I want to say to you all, if somebody else had asked me to give a talk for the Lions Club, I would have reflected on the last time I talked to the Lions Club, in which I talked about lions in art. The Crystal Palace is pretty remote from that kind of topic, and you have Patty to thank if you found it interesting, because she found it interesting and decided it was worth a replay. And when I gave this talk at the Neil Cochran House, I filled it with stats because I had much more time to cover it in, but it's to Patty's credit that you've heard this again.
All the glass and flickering lights that my imagination conjured up. I thought about the whirling bits of wrapping paper.
Yeah, Karen, if I may ask a question, I thoroughly enjoyed it again today, but do you do presentations on other World's Fairs? I'm thinking of the 1894
Well,
World's
you know,
Fair.
I would be, I do talk about the Chicago Fair. It has resonance for me, given my art history background, that the Great Exhibition doesn't. And it's also much better known, thanks in part to Eric Larson's book, and to the fact that parts of that fair still exist. You know, that all the buildings were temporary except one, and the one that still exists is the Museum of Science and Industry, and it's a spectacular, heavily visited building in Chicago. So that could be a sequel next year or something. I'd be happy to do that. I love the subject because it introduces Frank Lloyd Wright and the encounter of many people for the first time with the art of Japan. And that turns into a huge theme in the history of art in the last quarter of the 19th century, all the way up to Georgia O'Keeffe. That's a topic that I can talk about at great length, but it kind of gets its big boost in the States from the fair in Chicago.
Okay, well, we're gonna.
One more.
Sid's got a question.
Okay, Chuck has one.
Okay.
You used to give various meetings about talking about art. Now, are you having any more meetings? We used to be luncheons. Of course, we can't do that.
The luncheons had to be abandoned in March, and I've been Zooming monthly ever since. And you just aren't on the list, I guess, because I had a catastrophic data failure of my email list and didn't rebuild it except by recent emails. So let me find your email addresses and I'll add you and you'll get those notices again.
Okay.
And anybody who's interested in what I'm doing can find me online. If you just Google search Karen Pope Austin, I come up right away and you can poke around the website.
Thank you, Karen. This was a great talk. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Greg, back to you. Were you married? Was Varian with you when you camped on the grounds in Sydenham?
No, this was before I met her.
Ah.
Yeah, I started there and then I toured England and Scotland for 3 months, during which I saw the notice in the Times for an expedition forming to see if it was possible to drive from London to Johannesburg. I joined it and we did drive that distance and Varian joined it too. And that's where I met her.
Oh my gosh, what a story. That's fantastic. Golly. Well, my husband Alex was there 2 years after you. He took a train to, now I forget the place names, where the Land Rovers are put together. He ordered a Land Rover, went to Edinburgh to get camping equipment, came back, picked up his Land Rover and camped in his Land Rover all over Europe for months and months.
Oh, wow.
He was interested in the attempt to, they called it shooting the Darien Gap in South America, which was going to be done with Land Rovers. Yeah. But I didn't know him then.
Yeah. Oh, one quick question, please. What caused the fire that destroyed the Crystal Palace?
I don't know. I don't know if we know.
Oh, okay.
But if you can imagine how much machinery was working. Of course, there wasn't machinery necessarily at the Sydenham location, but the myriad events with probably insufficient safety protocols, probably, it could be the oily rag syndrome. Imagine all that glass and how it could work to set a fire just by the prismatic effect of the sun coming through the glass on the days that there's any sun, That I would think that would have been a hot building and a challenge to ventilate.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Any other questions so that we don't take up too much of Karen's time? So.
Well, I'm delighted to have shared some time with you all, and I'll hope to see you again soon.
I thank you so much. And our special thanks to Patty for arranging the program today.
Thank you, Patty.
And Mark for hosting us. So keeping everybody kind of on an orderly fashion. So thank you again, everybody. Take care. And we'll see you next week, next Thursday.
Okay.
Y'all take
Bye,
care.
everybody. Thank you.
Merry
Bye-bye
Christmas.
then.
Or tomorrow morning.
Or